welcome to Intuitive Watercolor. This series is going to be about simply painting with beautiful paints and a beautiful brush on lovely paper and letting the paint mix and mingle on the page and enjoying watching it, letting it dry, and then looking at what has dried and pulling out images that we might see in the paint. And I also hope to introduce you to new papers and new surfaces to paint on, because I find that this is a perfect way to try out a new paper to see how your pigments react on it. And today I'm using something called Ogami paper. And this is what Ogami paper looks like when it comes. I bought this from Jenny Bick, which is a wonderful website that I'll link in the description below. And Ogami paper, as it says here, the first notebook made from stone. This is the professional collection. It's the small size, 13 by 21 centimeters. It has a soft cover in this lovely robin's egg blue color, and it has plain paper, so no lines or dot grids or anything like that. And I purchased this a while ago, and I was using it for silver point practice. And not many papers on their own, without being prepared, will work with silver point. And silver point is basically drawing with a piece of precious metal like silver or gold or bronze or copper. And it needs some kind of tooth for the line to show up, and this paper is perfect for that. Because it is made out of stone, truly, and it has a wonderful feel. I can't explain it, but it feels like paper. It's very thin, but it also has a smoothness that's sort of plasticky. I can't explain it, but it's a beautiful surface, and I really enjoy working on it. So I'm going to use that today. And I have my Wild Thorn paints and my Sennelier 000 Squirrel Mop brush and my Ogami paper. I also have my aromatherapy spray that I made for winter. It's called Winter Forest, and it's a blend of Siberian fir and Douglas fir and Scotch pine and peppermint and spearmint, and it has a lovely, lovely aroma that's very uplifting to the spirits. So I'll be using that as well. And I'm going to start by wetting my brush and maybe just putting some water down on the paper. And then I'm going to look at my paints and decide on 3 colors. And I think today I'm going to use the wood rose, water rose, which is this lovely sort of peachy pink. And I'm just going to put it down on the paper. And I keep things very random. I'm not trying to create any specific image. I'm simply letting the paper and paint mingle together and do their magic. You know, watercolor is sort of magical that way. I'm going to put down some buff Titan or titanium. It's a lovely ecru color, and it mixes beautifully with the wood rose. And then, actually, I'm going to use some gold mica. And I think I'll use one more color. I think I'll use the raw umber, just to introduce a little depth. So once I have some paint on the paper, I look at it and maybe I'll want to add a little bit more of one of the colors. And I think that's really nice. So it's very simple. I'm not doing too much, but I'm going to take my aromatherapy spray and just sort of give it a spritz here and there. Running out. And you see how when you introduce water to pigment, especially with the essential oils in it, it tends to push the pigment away, and it starts to create little speckles and blooms and makes the paint react a little bit differently. So I am going to actually turn the video off at this point, and I'm going to let it dry okay? I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to use a hair dryer. I'm going to let the paint take its time, and I'm going to watch it and enjoy seeing how it shifts and changes as it dries. And then when it's completely dry, I'll come back and I'll show you the next steps. Okay, so my painting is almost dry now on the Ogami paper, and it did crinkle up a little bit because I didn't follow my directions and I tried a heat gun on it briefly and the paper instantly started to melt. So heed my advice: when you're using Ogami paper, don't use a heat gun or a hairdryer and just be patient. I needed to get this video done before I go to work today, and it was taking a long time to dry. So that's one thing I've noticed about this paper, is that it does take a long time to dry. So do this practice if you're using this paper when you do have some time to let it dry. I would say if I would have left it alone, it would have taken about an hour. So that's quite a long time, but I think the results are worth it. Over here, this section had dried before I used the heat gun, and you can see how beautifully it dried, and it has a bit of a sheen on the paper. It has a lovely, lovely finish. So I'm going to put my paints away. I'm done with my paints. And I'm going to show you a couple of things. I'm going to move the notebook. And I want to show you this notebook really quickly. This is a beautiful little notebook. It's a Midori notebook that I purchased from Amazon, and it comes in the typical Japanese way where it has this little leaflet that covers it. The same artwork is underneath this cover. And I use this as my Shibui notebook. And Shibui is a Japanese aesthetic that I'm really, really taken with, and I study it and I write about it when I can. And this notebook is dedicated to that aesthetic. And just a brief introduction to it. So Shibui is spelled S-H-I-B-U-I, and this is the Japanese character for it, and this is my monogram. But I just want to describe the 7 qualities of Shibui, and they are simplicity, implicity, modesty, silence, naturalness, everydayness, and imperfection. And I love these 7 qualities, and they are the 7 qualities that I try to embody in my own work as an artist and in my life. So I was looking through here this morning, and I wanted to read this quote to you because I think it's really important when doing intuitive art of any kind, or any kind of art. And it says, "The foundation is the heart and its inspiration, not rational thought. The foundation is the heart and its inspiration, not rational thought." And I think this is a really important thing to take into our hearts and to remember when we're creating, is that the foundation of when we're creating should be what is in our heart and our inspiration, and not about rational thought. And intuitive art is very much about those qualities. So I'll bring back my notebook. And I did put some clips on it because it was really curling up on me. And I want to show you a couple other supplies that I'm going to be using. And one of them is this Copic marker, and it is in warm gray. It's a Copic Multiliner in 0.03, so it's very, very fine. You can see how fine the tip is of this marker, and I'll use that to put a very faint line around anything that I wish to draw on this page. The reason I like these, number one, is because the line is so faint and pale, but also because it is waterproof, and that is important to me. If I were going to add any more watercolor to it, it's just a nice quality to have. And then the other tools that I have my Uni Kuru Toga mechanical pencil in 0.5 with the 2B lead, which I really like for most papers. We'll see how it reacts on here because the lead smudges so easily. And the lead I use is the Pilot Neox, and I found it to be the purest graphite mechanical pencil lead. It blends really, really lovely right under the fingertips. And then I have my set of colored pencils. And these I have in just this bamboo mat to keep them nice. And I just want to unroll this for you so you can see it. These pencils are by Tombow, and they are the Tombow colored pencils, and they're called, I'm sure I'll say it wrong, Irojiton. And I love these pencils because they aren't terribly waxy like Prismacolors can be, but I also love them for the really subdued colors that they come in. They also come in very bright colors, but what I did is I curated from my larger set these colors that sort of depict Shibui to me, the elements of Shibui, and so I use these a lot in my drawings and things like that. So I'm going to move these aside, and I'll have them to use if I need to. And I'll get my pencil and my marker, and I'm going to take a look at how the paint dried here. And I don't, sometimes I see something right away when these paints dry and I'm looking at it and something just appears to me. And as I'm looking at this one today, what I notice most are the beautiful colors. This beautiful wood rose color, the sheen of the gold. I love it just the way it is. I don't know that I want to put too much on it, but my eye is drawn to this texture over here that the buff Titan made when it mixed with the raw umber. And there's something very stone-like about it to me. So I'm going to draw stones. And I have this little heart-shaped stone that I love. I found it, and I love the texture on this. It's very pumice-like. So I'm going to keep that sort of over here just to refer to it as I draw. And I'm going to start with my pencil. And what I see is I see 3 stones. I see a larger one, then one down here in the foreground, and one over here on the side. And I just want to remind you that you can see anything in these watercolor paintings when you're working intuitively. And we don't want to focus too much on what our mind is telling us, but more what our heart is telling us, and how we would intuitively draw these stones. We don't need to make them perfect. Okay, they don't exist in the real world. They exist in our imagination and on the paper. So I'm using my 2B pencil. I'm going to give myself a little more lead. And I'm sort of surrounding this first rock that I see. Now, I haven't used pencil on this paper yet, so I don't know exactly how it's going to react, but I'm just sort of surrounding it. And I'm going to assume that the light is coming from this direction, because when I look at these, they're very light here and then very dark on the side. So I'm just going to put a little bit of shadow down here. And typically I use my finger to smudge this, but I can see that it's not going to smudge as easily. So I think what I'll do is I'll grab a blending stick, which is a really handy tool to have. I gotta open my pencil box. And I'll use the blending stick to see if I can't coax that graphite to be a little bit softer. Oh yeah, see, that makes a big difference. And also it allows you to get a little bit closer in with a more delicate touch than your finger would allow. Typically we shouldn't use our fingers because they have oils on them, but to be honest with you, I use them often when they work. If they don't work, then I grab my blending stick. So you can see I'm just sort of coaxing this graphite just to soften a little bit as I surround that first rock. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the other two. So where this middle ground rock sort of meets the back one, I'm also going to add some graphite. And then down here where it comes between the two rocks, I'll add a little more. And then I'll use my blending stump. Just really lightly smooth that graphite. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. I just want to give the illusion that these things are separated. So I noticed that up here I maybe went a little dark, so I'll just use my eraser and just sort of soften that. And if I get smudges on my paper, I can use a kneaded eraser later to remove them. And then I'll work down here and depict the bottom of that stone and where it might have a shadow. And by changing the pressure that I apply with my pencil, I can get a little bit of a softer line. So now I have the two, and I'm going to look up here where it meets the rose color, and I'm going to do the same. I'm just sort of outlining where I see the edge of that stone, where it just naturally appears in the paint. And I feel like it's a little bit rounded. So I'll fill in with a little graphite here. And then I'll use my blending stick again. Just sort of smudge that graphite in. And maybe this rose shape, how it transforms into there is also a stone. But I'm just going to stick to these three on the left side. And I think I'll use my finger a little bit just to blend and soften everything. There. So now I have these three stone shapes over here. And now I'm going to enhance those and give them a little bit of texture. So if you'll notice here, I've got all of these little white speckles where the aromatherapy spray hit the paint. And so I can very lightly, and I think for this I'm going to actually move to my Copic marker, and I'll show you how delicate it is. So I'm going to take the very tip of it and just lightly stipple around some of those little white marks, the textural marks that I see. And this could be different. Any subject that I see in here, I'm going to use different materials, different approaches, different marks, but it's just an intuitive process, and there is no way we can do it incorrectly, okay? So I'm just adding some of this really pale gray Copic marker where I see texture. Here I see a little bit of texture. Where the aromatherapy spray left its mark on the paint. And I can take some of these tiny little stipple marks out into the lighter area as well. Some bigger, some smaller, some darker, some lighter. And as it goes into the bright highlight, it would gradually disappear, so I won't need as many. Even some down on this one. It's very, very simple. So I'm going to smudge this graphite out a little bit more. I'm really loving the way this looks, and it may not look like three stones to you, but it does to me. Now, it's just so lovely to try your materials out on different surfaces, different types of paper. So I think what I'm going to do now is choose a very pale yellow pencil, and I'm going to see how that reacts on my paper. And I'm just going to make little circular movements with the tip of the pencil and let it sort of graze on the paper. And sort of define where the edge of this stone is. And it's adding just a hint of color, and it's really pretty. I don't know how much the camera picks up of these things. So any colored pencils would work. Just choose the colors that appeal to you, that make your heart sing, and incorporate those into your intuitive work. This is not about creating something realistic or that you have a lot of forethought into it. It's just about being in the moment with your materials and using what makes your heart sing. And these are the colors that make my heart sing in the material. So you can see how I've just added a little bit there. And I think I'll take a bit of a darker yellow. It's sort of a mustard color. And I'm just going to add a tiny bit of that. Again, I'm using the lightest pressure. Just creating sort of this pale glaze of color over my stone. Really lovely. And then for this one, I'm feeling pink, so I'm going to take a very pale pink and do the same. Just lightly grazing the paper with fine circular motions. I'm not digging into it, I'm not pressing hard. It's almost like an angel kiss. Just giving it the slightest blush of pink. Really pretty. And then I think I'll go to a very, very pale layer of a grayish blue-green. And this little area here in highlight, I'll just add a little bit of that green on the right-hand side of that. Just to make it pop out a little bit. And then I think I'll take sort of a dusky violet, really pale. I can see I need to sharpen my pencils. And I'm just going to fill in down here where the shadow is cast. See how lightly, you can hear it on the paper, but it's still very light. If I pressed harder, it would give me a darker color, but I don't want that. I just want this subtle hint of this gray violet. It's very, very subtle. Boy, this paper is smooth like butter. And I think that's it. I think I'm really happy with this. And it was very enjoyable to me. So when I'm done, I just take my pencil and I put my monogram. And my work is done for the day. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you will try your own intuitive painting. I'm going to do more of these for you, so you'll see many different subjects and many different techniques and materials and papers. But the most important thing is to remember that we have no expectations when we come to this work. It is sort of a meditative process. If I weren't explaining to you and speaking to you about it, I would do this in silence with a lovely cup of tea and some beautiful music. and I would just enjoy the process. Sometimes I have beautiful results, and other times it's something very simple, which is also very beautiful. So I hope that you'll try it and hope you'll share your results with me. You can always find me on my Facebook page at Kateri Ewing Watercolors and on my Instagram feed, which is just Kateri Ewing. Thanks so much for being here.